Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. With every conversation, we hope to inspire as many as possible to keep on dungeon mastering.
And I'm one of your hosts, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac.
And I'm one of your other hosts, DM Derrick, aka How Not to DM.
And there is no guest for this episode. We thought this one would be short and sweet. See what I did there? Because today we're going to be going back to our series, Ancestral Analysis. And this time around, we're going to be talking about gnomes. We're also going to talk about a fun little thing because lately I've said a lot of really nice things about the Discord, but I'm going to take a moment to throw shade at the Discord. And by that, I mean, not at all. I had a great time. And this is just me acting like I'm frustrated, but I have 0% frustration. If anything, the level of coordination that the Discord decided to have together is astounding. Because what I didn't know when I made a poll asking, what species would you like us to talk about next? I didn't know that Discord made it so that once you vote, you can see the votes and change your vote. So as a collective unit, the blockheads decided, wouldn't it be funny if all four options were 25%? So that's what happened. At the end of the poll, each option that was available had the exact same number of votes. So we left it to the dice, and the dice rolled gnomes. So here we are.
Well, Neal, that's okay because I just so happen to enjoy gnomes. And I also enjoy our folks on the Discord. So if you're listening now, you can join the Discord by heading to bit.ly/DMBanter to join us and have some fun, do some daily DMnastics with your best DM friends, and join our future office hours.
And maybe I'll figure out how to do polls differently. Maybe I won't.
That remains to be seen.
Yeah, I highly doubt this. I lack the desire to change these results, and I'm pretty sure we will continue to do it exactly as it was done before. I guess. With that, though, let's head to the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The flat meat's back on the menu, boys.
Today, for Ancestral Analysis, we're really excited to talk about gnomes. One of the 4 options that we presented are folks in the Discord, and with an even vote, this is what the dice decided. So, Neal, have you ever played a gnome in your games? And have you ever had a gnome in one of your games as a player of, one of your players?
So, yes and yes. I actually pulled up. I'm actively playing as a gnome, a forest gnome wizard in a game right now. So, I'm currently playing a gnome. This is the one where I bought a miniature where he was sitting down, like writing the book. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't pay enough attention to realize that it was true to size and became one of the most difficult paint excursions I've ever done in my painting career. Came out pretty well. So the miniature I got as the familiar is larger than the miniature for the character. Because he has an owl, and the owl is larger because he is seated. So that was a valuable lesson about gnome miniatures. So I've played one, but I haven't had very many over my time. It's been I would say a lot more dwarves and halflings, but not too many gnomes.
You are a creature of habit. Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I have ever played a gnome other than like a one-shot here or there as kind of like a bit character. As far as folks in my game, I've had halflings, but I don't think I've ever had a gnome player before. So we're kind of going, I'm kind of going in this with a little bit less experience other than I've used gnomes as NPCs and stuff. I've had gnome villages, gnome towns, gnome cities. So I've done a little bit, but as far as catering to people who've picked the gnome, you may have to kind of steer that conversation here.
Yeah, and I've definitely done a lot in that direction. And certainly there's been a lot in popular media that I've pulled on. There's definitely some really standout gnomes that I think of when I've read, sure. Because I've gone through all of the Salvatore and Dritz series, and then anything that's gotten even remotely close the Forgotten Realms novels kind of turned the wick down and became more manageable for me, I started reading everything. When it was coming out with basically like a novel a month, I was off that train. And I was only reading the Salvatore stuff at that time. But now that it's less, I'm pretty much reading all the D&D novels. They are definitely starting to ramp that back up and outpace me again. But there's some standout gnomes there. And my time in, playing way too much World of Warcraft, also has like some really set ideas of what I think gnomes are supposed to be. So it's often difficult for me, especially playing like a forest gnome. Like I have difficulties like squaring that circle because of how much time I played WoW.
Yeah. When you say that, is it just like the differences between the lore and like the races based on those fantasy or like that game versus what it is in D&D?
So I feel like there's two. I think this is a great place to start, because I think you have to kind of decide, like, when you establish gnomes. Basically, there's three types of gnomes when you think about it in D&D. And no, there's not. There's a billion. Do whatever you want.
Sure.
Three, roughly, you have rock, forest, and then deep. Feel free. We're going to call them
the
deep
Smurf
gnomes.
Neblin.
Yeah. They're awesome, because that's another thing is like Blingden Stone in the Drit series. And everything in there is really, really cool, because they're basically just nice, or, at least a decent species that's just down in the Underdark, and how they're surviving is just beyond me. It's basically because they have a lot of cool magic. But you have those sets, but I feel like in lore and in culture, you have two options. You've got like very fey or very mechanical. Like, and the two don't cross much. It's like David the Gnome, or like Gnome Ragon, and it's just covered in like, the artificer. You think of an artificer with like the goggles that have like 30,000 lenses covered in soot and gear oil, and they might explode. And then the next one is, got the red pointy hat, and him and his wife die at the end, and this fox is sad, and you wonder why this is shown to you as a small child. But like those, that's how the show ends, everybody. My bad. But like those are like, the more I'm thinking about it, like I don't see these ever crossing, but these are the two things you have to decide, and both are okay. And you can have both in your world, but like, this is an important distinction. And like when I play, so my character's name Merksif, just so we can have a reference point. But like when I play Merksif, I'm somewhat trying to merge the two, because it's that he is a forest gnome, but spend a lot of time out of that. And I know I've talked about it before, but picked up the crit roll thing where each morning I roll to see if I died. But part of it is that like he grew up in the forest, he spent a bunch of time, but now he's retired and had gone back. But he's kind of out for one last run. And so, yeah, this is the first time I've ever in my own way tried to kind of mix the two. Like, he has seen things, but yeah, for me, I can't separate the mechanical version very well. Like, as much as I love David the Gnome, if you ask me what a gnome looks like, it's gears. It's always going to be gears.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's lots of different kinds of gnomes, and you can certainly populate your world with all three of kind of the canonical ones, or anything in between. I feel like the classical examples of gnomes in media that I've consumed that is D&D adjacent or D&D is the same thing. Like they're the tinkerers, they're the mechanically minded, and that's kind of their thing, as opposed to being like, I don't know, like elf adjacent, smaller, but much more fey and much more nature focused. So yeah, that's definitely the way I kind of tend to use them. But I think certainly, whatever niche you want to fill, there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with gnomes.
In doing research, I always like looking around a little bit on the internet to kind of see like what approaches people have taken before in these conversations. And that is an interesting thing that kind of came up in a couple spots, is the idea that like halflings are, a smaller version of humans, and then gnomes are a smaller version of elves. And I'm like, are we just doing it because of the shape of their ears? Because it feels like that's what you're doing. But there is also this inherent affinity to magic.
Yeah.
That I think is an important piece across both. That, and it's always illusion. That is also this like very interesting thing that I've never quite gotten a hold of as to like what the original seed was. And so I think this is where the Fae element comes in, though, is like the original like gnomes in Fae lore before Dungeons and Dragons, like carried with it illusions and, hiding and doing these things and trickery and little things.
Yeah.
Like that. Where you think of the garden gnome and doing more innocuous things that aren't like, like, oh, that got moved around. Like, oh, haha. Not like this big nefarious plot, but like more mischievous. That's the word I'm looking for. Type things. And illusion magic always makes me think of that, where it's like you've played a trick on me, not that you've done something terrible to me.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I guess another common place where gnomes are used are in the Harry Potter series. There's a lot of discourse about how they are portrayed, so take that with a grain of salt, whichever or whatever you're thinking. But so yeah, with that in mind, Neal, do you want to jump into like creating gnomes as NPCs, or do you want to jump into like gnomes as like a block that you use in your games, kind of how you've designed them in the past and what you've used them to do?
I say NPCs. I think that's a good place to start. So for me, I think every gnome I've had be an NPC. I think a word that would describe every single one of them. And obviously they're all going to fit this word very differently, but like, I feel like they need to be eccentric in some way. Like there needs to be some kind of standout mannerism, some way they present themselves needs to fit the bill of eccentric. And whatever that ends up being, because like I said, is it the goggles that have 30 lenses? Is it that they are frenetic in their speech? Is it that they are very flashy in the things that they're wearing? Is it that they, or they're very secretive because you're doing more of the forest gnome type thing, and it's that they don't want to be found out, but they are willing to help and so on and so forth because, part of their forest is in danger. But yeah, eccentric.
Yeah, I like that. And that really kind of mirrors what the player's guide talks about, or the player's handbook. When you read it, it talks, obviously gnomes have an intelligence score that increases by 2. So they tend toward more those kinds of classes like your artificers, your wizards, more often than not, if players are picking them, if you're not going to do any of the updated like custom ancestries and stuff. Also, it says that they're often good, and those who tend toward law are sages, engineers, researchers, scholars, investigators, or inventors. Those who tend toward chaos are minstrels, tricksters, wanderers, or fanciful jewelers. So there's a lot of different stuff you could do with those, right? That gives you like 8 different kind of character archetypes or ideas to when you're building these NPCs. That's really kind of what I've drawn from most. My kind of main gnomes that they've interacted with, that my players have interacted with, have had a gnome who was kind of like the chief judge of a city. So he was like the one in charge of law, or the one who kind of hears cases and is the final say as to what happens on really high profile cases. And so that was really fun to kind of like, we even got to like role play a little court scene, and they had to justify their decisions or justify what they were trying to convince the gnome of, as he was the judge, and he had to make a decision based on their evidence. And that was really fun, like to do a little court scene. I'm not saying you should do that every session, but like it was kind of fun to sprinkle that in and just see what everyone could throw out, like all the words they knew from Criminal Minds and from other procedural shows that have a lot of law stuff in there.
Sustained, overrules.
Exactly. And then the other time I've used gnomes heavily was in a large city that I put in the side of a cliff. And the gnomes had developed these machines that would take the wind from the sea that was coming off and up through this crack in the cliffs to generate the power that they would use to run their society, which was a lot of fun too. So kind of a fun set pieces. They're sailing into this city. There's these huge fans that are spinning from this wind, and then everything else in the city is all clockwork based on the power that these things are generating. That was really fun to kind of build this whole society based on that. And the gnomes were the ones who, had engineered that technology and were harnessing that power of wind. And it made for, like, it was very flavorful, and, they were engaging. The players really wanted to engage with, like, all of the little doohickeys that would be running from this. And, it was fun for me to, like, think through, if you had that kind of energy you could harness, like, what kind of stuff would you do with it? Would you have plumbing? Would you have elevators, and would you have all of this other stuff that is kind of like constantly running and able to? So yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, that's always an interesting thing, having subsets of different species in towns, especially once you get to larger towns. Then you can have full representation of everything there. That way, everyone can have something to interact with. But when you have smaller towns, because I remember in the, especially in the 3rd edition days, one of the things they would often do is, you would look at a town and it would break the population by percentage. And so, if you were in a gnome town, it would be 70% is gnomes, and then it would break the rest out into smaller percentages. And it's always an interesting thought when you go in of, okay, if a town truly is 70% gnomes, what does this town look like then? And I often think of, for a larger character, I think of Critical Role, it's obviously it's locked in there because this is the first thing I thought of was the relationship between Pike and Grog. But the idea that if everything's being built for someone of Pike's size and Grog shows up, there's just, for me, the way that I'm going to handle this is I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to have a one-off of how it's handled and how it's funny, and then we're going to move on, because it doesn't need to be an encumbrance that is constantly talked about of how are you navigating this, and how are you ducking through this doorway, and how are you handling this confined space now, and what does it feel like when you have to go sleep later, and how are you No. Yes, I think it should be addressed, but at the same time, I don't think you should dwell on it. But then, like you said, from the other perspective is, if I'm choosing the ones with all the technology, then things need to be different. It can't be like the last inn that you were staying at, where you're getting your bread and gruel or whatever it may be in a bucket of ale and a bed. But something much more entertaining, where you order. Are you even ordering with a creature? Are you ordering with a robot?
Oh yeah, was an automaton. Yes, That's tons of fun. I added in a bunch of games that were playable within the taverns that were built into the walls of this cliff city.
Yeah,
I had a surfboard that you could like a balance board you had to try to balance on that would wiggle around. And then I had other stuff like that was all being powered by these same fans, right? And it just gave them something to do when they showed up to the tavern, right? Oh, look, there's a high score on the wall of the, whoever made the high score. Can you beat the high score? You got to do a series of, acrobatics checks or whatever to stay on this thing. Kind of like a mechanical bowl. I just tried to think of what weird stuff would the gnomes have built that they would be taking advantage of. Exactly. How is this tavern different than your run-of-the-mill tavern?
Yeah, and there's something that I think is just carried out through just the way that they're portrayed. And as always, whatever you want to do. But I think there's something that is really prevalent that I'm really thinking about now, is that the way gnomes are portrayed, it feels like a very much don't let perfection get in the way of progress. The idea of tinkering is that I'm always going to do that next iteration.
Yeah.
I'm always going to play into the next thing. But because of that, often things don't always work perfectly. So when I think about the idea of ordering at the restaurant, I think of the scene from Dude, Where's My Car and the and then scene. Or just the idea of it being, that really poorly done drive-through thing. Or and just doing it that way, rather than, because it's not that everything's perfect. They're working with what they have, but they're coming up with these
technology. I'm sure you've heard the recordings, the very first physical recordings that humans created were on those wax cylinders, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard the replay of those?
Mm-hmm.
You can barely understand a thing from that. And that's exactly what gnomes would have. This is cutting edge, we have recorded someone's voice and now we can play it back somewhere else. But can you understand it? Who knows? An example of this that I really enjoy, friend of the show and a fellow Block Party podcast member, Josh Lorimer, in Titans of Altera, in the first season of their show, they visit an island that is completely run by the gnomes. And their hierarchy is like, until you have invented something that no one else has invented, then you're kind of like a second-class citizen. Not in such that like that you like don't actually have the same rights, but it's, no one cares about you until you have invented something. And then whoever has invented the most interesting or like best thing is in charge of the gnomes, right? Like, of course, that would be their hierarchy. Whoever has the best ideas and has created the most interesting, useful thing is in charge. And it would definitely be merit-based if they were that kind of gnome society that really prides themselves in creating and that kind of thing. And one of the characters, he hasn't invented anything yet. When they meet him, he's kind of like their liaison for the party. And then when they meet him again in season 2, he's invented something. And so now he's important. And he's got like money and fame and power and stuff. And it's really funny. Anyway, a great example of kind of the Gnome Island and like they are running experiments and there's explosions and stuff all over the place. That's a fun one to check out if you want some inspiration.
I mean, if you're trying to set things up for a gnome character that you have, I think something like that can be really interesting, because a lot of times the gnome reason for adventuring oftentimes is like the adventure itself is often the heart of it, like the exploration, finding that next thing, learning that new technology, like going further than boldly going where no gnome has gone before. Yeah, but doing those sorts of things can be really interesting for a gnome character that you have at your table. I think another thing that is good is also having familial ties, but not using them in like the negative way, but having pulling back on those in like an important way, but getting a letter from someone and it being important enough that it changes that next arc of your campaign, because it's important enough to that gnome character to say, hey, the family has an issue and I have to go back because I need to handle that. And I would love it if you all could come help me. So I think those are some really good things to pull on, especially, I mean, heck, it could just be gems. I mean, at the end of the day, it could just be big shiny gems as well. Classic first edition, popping the big rubies out of the eyes. But
yeah, and you're right. The familial connection is a lot of fun, because the dynamic between Grog and Pike is so fun because they're vastly different characters, but they respect each other and they enjoy each other's company and they look after each other in different ways, right? And so when you can kind of create that synergy, then it's easy to convince your players. It's easy to convince the rest of the party to come help someone. Gnomes are kind of like they're not going to be the big, strong, frontlining, damage soaking. They're not going to be that kind of character. And so inevitably they're going to be like not the side character or the bench character, but they're going to be less in your face, certainly. And so to give them a way to shine and a time to shine by like everyone rallying around them is always a fun time and always really rewarding.
So I did probably cut this out, but there are a lot of big words that come up when we start talking about gnomes, because we have yet to address it, and we're far enough in that it needs to be talked about, because the main deity for a long time was none other. You know what? I will read his honorifics as they were written for the introduction to the Gnome Father, a book featuring none other than Garl Glittergold, the most splendiferous, gregarious, and overall duplicitous of gods, especially for the gnomes who embody those attributes quite cheerfully, is Garl Glittergold. So yes, that is the gnome god, who has one wicked set of mutton chops that fold expertly into his moustache. and what can only be described as pantaloons. So it literally, the holy symbol is just a giant gold nugget. I forgot about that. Lawful good. I also see, and this goes back to my original thing that I was saying, because this is a wild balance, is that the alignment of Garl Glittergold is lawful good and the domain is trickery. Like, again, that's a hard, you got trying to square that circle is difficult. I mean, it's how I tried to approach when I was pranking back in my day.
You only commit pranks against those who are not good.
No, rule number 1, never break anything, and just be kind. It just be fun. It's trying to have a fun time. That's all.
Harmless pranks.
Yeah. That's why I never got in trouble.
So he's lawful good and his domain is trickery. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then channel divinity is cloak of shadows and invoke duplicity.
Oh, for his domain. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, duplicity. Oh, I wonder if Matt Mercer just reskinned this for Jester in Critical Role Season 2, because she's always invoking that duplicity. Anyway, Gnomes are also really fun because of that Fey blood they've got. You've got advantage against intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, or for those throws against magic. So it makes sense that you would kind of be a trickster, but then you would be able to defend yourself against tricks and traps and stuff that you might be coming in contact with. Not a lot of gnome clerics out there usually, but it would be fun to play one.
I was trying to pull up some general stats as well. So while I am currently playing a gnome and, haven't played too many of my time, and you said the same, it does seem to be that's likely the case. What is wild though is I had found an article from about, I'm going to say like 8 months ago, but gnome was at the top. Gnome wizards were pretty far up there because of the bonuses they get and stuff like that. The affinity to magic.
Right.
I mean,
2 to intelligence, and if you choose a rock gnome, you get 1 to constitution, both of which wizards would love.
Yeah, and you're already leaning into the magic and things like that.
Yeah, the advantage on the saving throws and stuff, the dark vision. Yeah, a lot to like.
It was wild to see. I think it was, around October 25, a person had been doing this D&D Beyond scraping that was basically set like 200,000 account, or like everything's public for the most part. So then someone's just using basically scraping their website for info and then seeing like what people are doing. And gnomes at that time were the number 1 species that people were picking. It's not the case anymore. It's back to humans. So woo! The old human fighter back in action. Typically named Bob, by the way.
Bob, the human fighter, is the most common.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I can see that. That's like your standard character you pick when you don't want to make any other decisions.
Yep.
I get it. Oh, so yeah. Forest gnomes have the ability to do minor illusion or speak with small beasts. Rock gnomes have the ability to make intelligence checks and add twice their proficiency for checks on magic items, alchemical objects, and technological devices, which is cool. And oftentimes rock gnomes have this tinker stuff. Anyway, that's kind of like it for the 5e, but let's look at the 5.5 book. It's a lot shorter because they've really consolidated stuff. Gnomes are magical folk created by gods of invention, illusions, and life underground. Sorry, is that saying gods of invention and gods of illusion and gods of life underground? Or is that just saying gods of invention and also illusions and life underground?
Yeah, I think it's all 3.
Okay.
I think it's just to cover the 3 races. So the other thing that's interesting is, again, so depending on the lore that you want to go with, the lore as it stands in some versions is that Garl Glittergold birthed the gnomes from the gems of the earth, and out of diamonds came the rock gnomes, out of emeralds came the forest gnomes, and out of rubies came the deep gnomes, as if they were flowers themselves, and opened up, and they're the gnomes, so on and so forth. Because I mean, once you start doing that, I mean, I know this is the thing that I feel like every DM's brain does, is the second you do something like that, once you give me a list of 3 gems and a reason that 3 things exist because of them, then obviously I need to find every gem and tell myself every other gnome that exists because of of course I need to do that.
Of course. Yeah. Interestingly, in 5.5, they have the advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, but it's just carte blanche. It's not only for magical effects, which is interesting. I guess maybe there's not as many saving throws for those things that aren't magical effects, but
yeah,
it could happen. What do you do, Neal, when you have a player who's chosen a race like a gnome or a halfling, and they feel like they are limited because of their size or their movement in the game mechanically in combat or that kind of thing?
Have another character throw them. No. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you feel like is your go-to to make them still feel important or useful? Also, do you find yourself preying upon their size with NPCs, or do you try to kind of steer clear of that? Because I feel like that's been a lot of people's complaints. My brother, when he played a halfling, his chief complaint was the movement thing. Not because they're mean, but my other players would kind of, jokingly refer to his size in game, like, oh yeah, he's too small to do this or whatever. After a while, that can kind of annoy a person, the wrong person, right? Some people are fine with it and take it in stride because it's a game, and some people don't.
So it's interesting because you've asked a question that should pertain to me so much more than it does. Because you asked a question that should be so directly up my alley, but I've never once thought of it. I've never let it hinder my character. I've just accepted it as part of the character. I mean, so then I guess
you've never had players in your games that have this issue.
No, but I see it. I understand it, because all it's going to need to happen is I'm going to need to be 5 feet short in my movement a couple times when I need it. And I'm going to be really frustrated about that. It's happened to me, but like part of it is it's not going to be very easy to have the conversation of the reason you have a mechanical disadvantage of having a 25-foot movement is because oftentimes you have a mechanical advantage because gnome cunning is wild.
Yeah.
Being able to have an intelligence, wisdom, and charisma save against magic, just in general, straight up, every time something falls into that category, you roll 2 dice, is wild. Doesn't matter. I was 5 feet short and I didn't get to do what I wanted to do. So I don't think those conversations can help you. But I think one of the bigger things to do is to start giving opportunities where it is to their benefit.
Yes.
That's way more advantageous to this conversation than being like, but no, in the eventuality that this other thing totally could happen. I think giving the opportunity for gnome cunning to come up specifically is important. I think having it where dark vision mattered is important. I think showcasing these other aspects of their stat block as a species is more important than just telling them, because it's not going to matter. Because the thing that did matter right in that moment that they're complaining about, and rightfully so, because again, it's true. Like I didn't get to go where I wanted, and was I XYZ any, all these other choices, I would be there. I think giving opportunity to showcase the other aspects will be the thing that kind of sets them apart.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. To your point, halflings having luck, right? That's a huge advantage as well, mechanically. So yeah, I think that's good. Like helping reframe question like, hey, look, you actually get a lot of cool stuff and here's why it's cool. And then giving them chances to feel cool, right? Oh, you can fit in small places.
Yeah, I think having a physical limitation that they are one of the only that can get through somewhere or to somewhere is important as well. I'd go so far as, okay. So let's say the scenario you presented me truly is like gets really out of hand. Okay. If it gets really, really out of hand, then I have to have a conversation above the table and we got to address it. But let's say it's getting out of hand. and I want to try something at the table to see if I can curb it at the table, not above the table. Can I do something at the table? I might go so far as to say they're the only person that can get in because of their size. And I have and I do the whole private conversation thing. Maybe there's a couple characters and, it's a dwarf and a gnome, or, there's a halfling or whatever. Or someone has the ability to polymorph or fill in the blank. But only these people can go into here because there are just sheer physical, cultural, whatever limitations, and then address it that way. I would do it just to see what happens, to see if it helps alleviate some of the tension. I mean, it's not a surefire way, but in the early stages of that kind of conflict, I would certainly do it. In the later, again, it might have to just be an actual above table conversation.
I like that though. Whenever you can make players shine, and like specific players shine, and kind of give them their moment, that is a lot of fun to me. So long as you're good about rotating kind of who's getting to shine and why. I sometimes find myself getting trapped into like offering the similar problems to where only one player gets to kind of solve the problem. And I really try to stay out of that for that reason. So mixing it up and making sure that they can kind of do that is really nice. Anything else that's kind of top of mind about gnomes? I feel bad. This wasn't super meaty, but hopefully people enjoyed it.
I think it was a good cover. I think it was a good conversation about like the generalized things that that are distinct about gnomes. I think we did a really good conversation about making gnomes distinct, because that is probably the most important thing about what you're doing when introducing gnomes, because they can't be halflings. They can't be dwarves. And still like you have to do, elves. You have to do the thing, something in your world that makes them set apart from the other races in your world. And the fey magic that they have has to be different in some way from the elves. Their size component needs to be addressed some way differently than halflings. The way that they tinker and build and construct, because when you were talking about making that next invention, it made me think a lot about dwarves, but it's not in any way the same thing, because dwarves become masters of their craft and like they build this one truly amazing, like put all their heart and soul into one item, and usually it becomes magical. And like the best smiths make the best, weapon or item, but they'll never make something like it again. And they kind of like quit because they know they'll never achieve that pinnacle ever again. Whereas the gnomes, I think they could make an invention and then get outdone and still be in the game and be like, okay, I can go again and I can make something more. And so I think there's a lot of things to do to try and differentiate them. And I think that's probably the most important thing, is just finding that one thing that makes them truly unique in whatever setting you're playing in.
So yeah, whether it's like secretive druidic, really heavily fey influenced gnomes, or it's the tinkering gnomes, or it's the deep gnomes, that could kind of be a weird combination of both, right? There's no rules that say you can't have deep gnomes that are druids that are exploring the giant unexplored caverns of their kind of home. And there's no reason why they couldn't also be tinkering away and stuff. You could have a lot of different interesting combinations. But yeah, homework. Like I said, I think Titans of Altera is a good place to listen to. It's within the first few episodes where they visit the gnome city that's pretty fun. I also think that you can look more into like Pike Trickfoot as a really good example of an interesting gnome that has, an interesting arc that's not just based on like where she comes from and what kind of tropey gnome stuff. She's very much not the trope gnome that is either into nature and fey stuff or into inventions. She's very much her own character, which is fun.
We didn't really bring it up, but in 4th edition, when it very first came out, gnomes were not a playable race. Tieflings were for the first time. Gnomes were a monster. So I'm going to link down in the show notes video from Bob, the World Builder, and it's going to have all of the promotional videos from 2008. These videos are old enough to go buy a lottery ticket, and
they are. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. that video, the first video I showed you is 18 years old. That video has been online for 18 years. The first one you clicked on.
I've been online for longer than that. That is depressing.
But yeah, if you go over there, you can check out a hilarious video that I still quote to this day because the gnome is experiencing monstrous life for the first time and says fun things like, I have a lair and I got a minion. Say hi, Francis. And you too can quote fun things like that. So there's that. I like you all well enough, listeners, to not tell you to go play World of Warcraft.
There's gnomes in J.K. Rowling's work. There's also gnomes in the Chronicles of Narnia, which feels crazy. I don't remember gnomes in the Chronicles of Narnia. Small, sentient race, underground inhabitants, specifically native to Bism. Okay, so they were kind of like the creepy underlings. This is kind of like maybe reminding me. I don't know. It's been a long time since I read through Narnia. Anyway, Silver Chair has gnomes in the Chronicles of Narnia. That's an interesting place to dig around, perhaps, if you want to have maybe like a weirder, darker version of what they could be.
I like it. Yeah, I think that does it.
But if you want to tell us about how you've been using gnomes in your game, you can go email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com and tell us all about it. We would love to hear from you.
And of course, if you like this episode or any of the others, you can head over to iTunes or your podcatcher of choice and leave a rating and a review. And of course, if you want to head over to social media, typically you can find us at DMS_block. That's at DMsBlock. And of course, we are a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network, where you can check out other shows like Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, The Titans of Altera, Bad Venture Club, and Noct Pro, who's currently doing some Eberron, where you can probably find gnomes wearing goggles with a bunch of lenses on them. Most likely, they'll be artificers because it's Eberron and more.
Thanks for listening to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God,
killing characters,
and lowering the egos of all the other people at the table. I'm DM Derrick, saying monsters fade, stories last.
I'm DM Neal. Good night, good luck, and keep on dungeon mastering.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
You should have everyone watch David the Gnome. All of it. Before your next session. That's their homework.
Goodbye.